Imagine spending 5 years building a company from the ground up, working 80-hour weeks, sacrificing weekends and holidays, only to be dismissed as just a secretary by your business partner's entitled daughter. That's exactly what happened to me last month at our company's annual gala. Little did she know that while her father owned 49% of Taylor & Reed Consulting, I quietly held the controlling interest at 51%. Her smug expression when she told me to fetch her another drink quickly transformed into sheer panic when she discovered who really called the shots. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to how it all began. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 6 years ago, my life looked completely different. I was working as an executive assistant at Pinnacle Industries, a Fortune 500 company in downtown Chicago. The pay was decent, the benefits were good. But after 8 years in the same position with minimal advancement opportunities, I felt stuck in a gilded cage. My boss, Victor Hammond, appreciated my work but never saw me as leadership material. Despite my MBA from Northwestern and countless innovative proposals that others took credit for, I remained just Olivia, the reliable assistant. The breaking point came during the company's quarterly review meeting. I had prepared a comprehensive analysis of a potential acquisition that could save Pinnacle millions. I handed my report to Victor, expecting him to at least acknowledge my contribution. Instead, he presented my findings as his own, never once mentioning my name. The executives loved the proposal, and Victor received a substantial bonus. I got a gift card to Starbucks and a pat on the back. That evening, I sat in my modest apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, nursing a glass of wine and contemplating my future. The city lights twinkled below, mirroring the tears in my eyes. I was 36 years old with a stellar education, sharp business acumen, and nothing to show for it except a drawer full of thank you cards and coffee gift certificates. My phone rang. It was Richard Taylor, a former executive at Pinnacle who had left 2 years prior to start his own consulting firm. We had always gotten along well. Richard was one of the few who recognized my capabilities beyond my job title. "Olivia, how are you?" His voice carried the warm, southern drawl he had never lost, despite decades in Chicago. "Hanging in there, Richard. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I think it's what I can do for you. I've been watching how they treat you at Pinnacle. It's criminal, wasting talent like yours. I'm expanding Taylor Consulting, and I need a partner, not an employee. Someone with your analytical skills and people management. Would you be interested in discussing a proposition?" My heart raced. "I'm listening." We met the next day at a small cafe away from the business district to avoid curious eyes. Richard laid out his vision. A boutique consulting firm specializing in mergers and acquisitions for mid-sized companies, a niche that larger firms often overlooked. He had clients and connections, but needed someone who could build the operational framework and lead the analytical team. "I can offer you 30% equity to start," Richard said, sliding a preliminary agreement across the table, "with performance milestones that could increase your share over time." I studied the document, then looked up at him. "I have a counter-proposal. I'll invest my entire savings, $250,000, for 51% ownership. I'll also secure 2 major clients I've been quietly nurturing on the side." Richard's eyebrows shot up. "That's bold, Olivia. Why 51%? "Because I'm tired of having my voice ignored. This isn't about controlling you, Richard. It's about finally having the authority to implement my ideas without asking permission." He nodded slowly, respect evident in his eyes. "Let me think about it." 3 days later, we signed the papers. Taylor & Reed Consulting was born, my maiden name added to the letterhead. We agreed on one unusual condition. My ownership stake would remain confidential. To the outside world, Richard would be the face of the company, the charismatic frontman with the connections. I would build the machine that made everything work. People underestimate you because of your previous role, Richard explained. We can use that to our advantage. Let them think what they want while we quietly revolutionize the industry. The arrangement worked beautifully. While Richard wined and dined clients, I assembled a team of brilliant analysts and developed proprietary software that could identify merger opportunities others missed. Within 2 years, our small firm had facilitated deals worth over $2 billion. Our office expanded from a tiny suite to occupying the entire 34th floor of a prestigious downtown building. Despite our success, I maintained a relatively low profile. I had my own office with the title Chief Operations Officer, but many of our clients and even some of our newer employees assumed I was Richard's highly competent assistant who had been promoted. I never corrected them. The misunderstanding allowed me to observe people's true characters, who respected everyone regardless of perceived status, and who revealed their ugly biases. Richard's personal life was as successful as our business. Happily married for 20 years to Elena, a brilliant neurosurgeon, they had raised their daughter Madison in privilege but with strong values. At least that's what Richard believed. I had my doubts about Madison. During her occasional visits to the office, I noticed how differently she treated people depending on their title. She was charming to the executives but barely acknowledged the support staff. Madison graduated from an Ivy League school with a business degree and, naturally, expected to join the family business. Richard was thrilled, envisioning a dynasty that could continue after his retirement. I was less enthusiastic but kept my concerns to myself. After all, she was his daughter, and despite my majority ownership, this was still very much a family matter. She'll start in client relations, Richard told me over lunch. She has her mother's charm and my business instincts. Are you sure she's ready? I asked cautiously. Maybe she should get experience elsewhere first. Richard waved away my concern. She's Taylor. This company has Taylor in the name. Besides, where better to learn than from us? I couldn't argue with his paternal pride, so Madison joined the firm 3 months ago. To my surprise, she showed genuine aptitude for the work. Her presentations were polished, her analysis somewhat superficial, but promising. What hadn't improved was her attitude toward those she perceived as beneath her, particularly me. Since we had never clarified our company structure to Madison, she assumed I was someone her father had charitably promoted from an administrative role. She was unfailingly polite when Richard was present, but the moment he stepped away, the facade dropped. Olivia, could you make copies of this presentation? She'd ask without looking up from her phone. That's not really my job, Madison. Janet, at the front desk, can help you with that. She'd roll her eyes. Dad told me you were here to support the team. I'm just asking for a little help. These minor interactions continued, and I chose not to make an issue of them. Richard was so happy having his daughter working alongside him that I didn't want to create tension. Besides, I had built this company on people underestimating me. One more person doing so hardly mattered. The real trouble began when Madison started dating Wesley Thompson, the son of our biggest competitor, Thompson Strategic Advisors. I discovered this connection accidentally when reviewing security logs, and noticed Madison had used her access card to enter the building at 11 p.m. on a Sunday, accompanied by someone. Security footage showed her giving Wesley a tour of our offices, including areas with sensitive client information. Nothing was obviously taken, but the breach of protocol was serious. When I confronted her privately, her reaction was dismissive. We were just hanging out, she said with a shrug. It's not like he's a spy or something. We're dating. Madison, he works for our direct competitor. At the very least, this creates a conflict of interest. Her eyes narrowed. I don't answer to you. If there's an issue, my father can discuss it with me. This isn't about hierarchy. It's about basic security protocols that everyone follows. She laughed. Let's be honest, Olivia. You're just jealous because you're pushing 40 and alone, while I have options. You've spent your life as someone's assistant. I'm Taylor. I maintained my composure. I'll be discussing this with Richard. In the meantime, please don't bring visitors after hours. Whatever, she muttered as she sauntered away. I did speak. With Richard, who was concerned but inclined to believe his daughter's claim that it was innocent. He promised to talk with her about security protocols, but didn't seem to grasp the potential severity of the situation. A week later, I noticed discrepancies in our client database. Someone had accessed files for Meridian Healthcare, a potential acquisition target we had been carefully researching for months. The digital fingerprints led to Madison's login credentials. More troubling, the very next day, Thompson Strategic advisors announced they had been retained to represent a buyer interested in Meridian. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. We had lost a major opportunity, one that would have generated millions in fees. I needed concrete evidence before approaching Richard, so I asked our IT director to discreetly monitor Madison's system activities. Within days, we had proof. Madison had been systematically copying confidential information and sending it to an external email address, Wesley's personal account. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It struck at the heart of everything Richard and I had built together. I compiled the evidence and scheduled a private meeting with Richard for the following morning. Before I could present my findings, however, an even more public drama unfolded. Our annual Client Appreciation Gala was that evening, a lavish affair at the Chicago Art Institute where we thanked our clients and announced new initiatives. Everyone dressed impeccably, champagne flowed freely, and Richard gave his usual charismatic speech thanking the team for another successful year. I was speaking with the CEO of a manufacturing firm when Madison approached, clearly having had too much champagne. "Olivia, just the person I need," she said loudly. "We've run out of those little crab puffs at table 3. Be a dear and check with the caterers." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The CEO looked uncomfortable. "I believe Ms. Reed is in the middle of explaining your new analytical framework." Madison laughed. "Oh, she's not really involved in that. She's just good with spreadsheets and keeping the office running. Dad lets her attend these things because she's been with him forever. She's basically family, like a loyal pet." The CEO's expression turned frosty. "Actually, Ms. Reed was just explaining how her algorithm identified our acquisition target with 97% accuracy when nobody else in the industry saw the opportunity. She saved us millions." Madison's smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on. "Well, she's very good at what she does. But between us, she's just a secretary who got lucky with a fancy title. Now about those crab puffs. I had maintained my dignity through countless slights over the years, but something about this moment, perhaps the culmination of discovering her betrayal, made me decide it was finally time for truth. "Madison," I said calmly, "I'm not your secretary. I never was. I'm the majority owner of this company. Your father owns 49%. I own 51%. We kept that arrangement private for business reasons, but I think it's time you understood exactly who you've been disrespecting, and more importantly, who you've been betraying by sharing our confidential information with Wesley Thompson." The color drained from her face. Around us, conversation stopped as people turned to witness the unfolding drama. That's not true," she stammered. "Dad founded this company. It's Taylor Consulting." "Taylor and Reed Consulting," I corrected, gently. "Check the incorporation documents. Better yet, ask your father." As if on cue, Richard appeared at my side, his expression grave. He had always been an observant man. He had clearly been watching the interaction unfold. "It's true, Madison," he said quietly. "Olivia is my boss, not the other way around. She's been gracious enough to let me be the face of this company, but she's always been the brains and the majority owner. And we need to talk about what you've been sharing with the Thompsons." Madison's eyes darted between us, her social confidence evaporating as she realized the magnitude of her misconception and her mistakes. The glass of champagne in her hand trembled so violently that amber liquid sloshed onto her designer dress. I didn't," she began, but the evidence was too overwhelming for denial. I decided to spare her further public humiliation. "We'll discuss this tomorrow morning in the conference room. 8 a.m. sharp." I turned back to the CEO. "Now, about that market expansion strategy we were discussing." As I continued my conversation, I could see Madison retreating from the gala, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The revelation was now spreading throughout the room in whispers and surprised glances my way. I didn't mind. After years in the shadows, it felt surprisingly liberating to be acknowledged as what I truly was. Not just the woman behind the successful man, but the architect of my own success. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and decisions about Madison's future with the company if she had one at all. But tonight, for the first time in years, I stood fully in my power, no longer hidden behind anyone's misconception of who I was or what I had built. I barely slept that night. The confrontation at the gala kept replaying in my mind. Madison's shocked expression, Richard's quiet confirmation, the ripple of whispers spreading through the room. By morning, I knew our company would never be the same. The carefully maintained illusion had shattered, and I wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. I arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours earlier than my scheduled meeting with Madison and Richard. The floor was silent, dawn just beginning to illuminate the Chicago skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I stood there for a moment, watching the city awaken, gathering strength for what promised to be an intense day. My office had always been understated compared to Richard's corner suite. It was a deliberate choice, part of the narrative we'd constructed. Today, I rearranged things, moving my desk to directly face the door rather than sitting at an angle. Small changes, but they sent a message. No more hiding. At 7:45, Richard arrived, looking like he hadn't slept either. His normally impeccable appearance was slightly rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. "Good morning," I said, handing him a cup of coffee, black with 1 sugar, just how he liked it. "Is it?" he asked with a weak smile, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Olivia, I don't even know where to begin. The things Madison has done? Let's wait until she arrives. We need to handle this as a unified front." Richard nodded, collapsing into a chair across from my desk. "Elena is devastated. She had no idea Madison was capable of this level of deception." At precisely 8 a.m., Madison appeared in my doorway. Gone was yesterday's arrogance, replaced by evident anxiety. Her hair was pulled back severely, her makeup minimal. She looked younger, more vulnerable, almost like the teenager who used to visit the office years ago. "Come in, Madison," I said, gesturing to the chair beside her father. "Close the door." She complied without comment, her eyes downcast. For a moment, none of us spoke, the tension thick enough to slice with a paper knife. "I have the IT reports here," I finally said, sliding a folder across the desk. "They detail every confidential file you accessed and forwarded to Wesley Thompson over the past 3 months. Richard opened the folder, his expression darkening as he scanned the contents. Madison didn't even reach for it. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Richard asked his daughter, his voice strained with the effort to remain calm. Madison looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It wasn't what you think." "Then what was it?" I asked evenly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like industrial espionage. That's not just a firing offense, Madison. It's potentially criminal." Her composure cracked. Wesley said he was just curious about how successful firms operate. He never told me he was using the information to steal clients. I thought I was just impressing my boyfriend. Richard's face flushed with anger. You've been working here for 3 months. You signed confidentiality agreements. You have an Ivy League business degree. Are you really claiming you didn't understand the implications of sharing proprietary information with a competitor? Madison's tears flowed freely now. You always said family comes first in business. I thought that meant I had certain privileges. Privileges. Richard's voice rose. Not crimes! What were you thinking? I raised a hand, keeping my tone measured. The why doesn't change what happened, though it might influence what we do next. Madison, you need to understand the gravity of your actions. The Meridian healthcare deal you compromised was worth approximately $4.2 million in consulting fees. To this firm, your actions have cost real money and damaged our reputation. Madison's shoulders slumped. What's going to happen to me? I exchanged glances with Richard before answering. That depends on several factors. First, we need your complete cooperation. Every detail of what you shared, when, and what Wesley told you about how it would be used. Second, we need to assess whether you acted out of naivety or malice. Wasn't malice, she whispered. I wanted to impress him, and I was angry. Angry? Richard frowned. About what? She looked directly at me. At you, Ms. Reed. I couldn't understand why my father treated you with such deference. You were supposed to be just an employee, but he consulted you on everything, valued your opinion over mine. It felt like you were taking my place in the company, in my father's life. The raw honesty was unexpected. I softened my tone slightly. That wasn't my intention. But Madison, business isn't about birthright. It's about competence, integrity, and judgment. Even if I weren't the majority owner, your father respects people who demonstrate those qualities. Richard cleared his throat. Madison, I need you to understand something. Olivia isn't just my business partner. She saved this company before it even properly began. My initial investors pulled out at the last minute, leaving me with an empty office and mounting debt. Olivia stepped in with her life savings when no bank would touch me. She designed our entire operational model. Without her, there would be no company for you to inherit any portion of. This was clearly news to Madison, whose expression shifted from defensive to confused. Why didn't you ever tell me this? Would it have changed how you treated her? Richard asked pointedly. Madison fell silent, unable to meet either of our gazes. Here's what's going to happen, I said after a moment. You're suspended, effective immediately. No access to our systems, no contact with clients. You'll work with our legal team to provide a complete statement regarding your communications. With Wesley Thompson, if you cooperate fully, we may, and I stress may, avoid pressing charges. You're firing me? Madison looked at her father pleadingly. Not firing, I clarified. Suspending. What happens next depends partly on you. Richard nodded in agreement, though the pain in his eyes was evident. Madison, you need to understand that your actions have consequences. This isn't something that can be swept under the rug with an apology. We spent the next hour outlining exactly what we needed from Madison. A full written confession, access to her personal devices and accounts that might contain company information, and her cooperation with our legal team in building a case against Thompson's strategic advisors. By the time she left my office, escorted by our head of security who would oversee the surrender of her company devices, Madison looked shell-shocked. The privileged young woman who had swanned into our offices 3 months ago, expecting to climb the corporate ladder based on her last name, had been replaced by someone facing the harsh reality of her choices. Once she was gone, Richard collapsed back into his chair. I failed her, Olivia. Somewhere along the line, I failed to teach her the values that matter. Don't shoulder all the blame, I said gently. Madison is an adult who made her own choices. He nodded absently, then looked up at me with renewed focus. What's our next? Move with Thompson? This was the Richard I knew, capable of compartmentalizing personal pain to focus on business strategy. I pulled up an encrypted file on my computer. I've been preparing for this possibility since I first suspected Madison was leaking information. Our legal team has drafted a cease and desist letter, demanding they withdraw from the Meridian deal since their knowledge was obtained through corporate espionage. They'll deny it. Of course they will, I agreed. But I've also reached out discreetly to Meridian's CEO. Bradford owes me a favor from back in my Pinnacle days. I saved his company from a hostile takeover attempt. He's agreed to delay any formal agreement with Thompson for 48 hours while we present our case. Richard's eyebrows rose. You've been busy. I protect what's mine, I said simply. This company, our employees, our reputation, they're worth fighting for. A knock at the door interrupted us. Janet, our office manager, poked her head in. Sorry to disturb you, but the executive team is assembling in the conference room. After last night's revelations. They have questions, I nodded. Tell them we'll be there in 5 minutes. After Janet left, Richard gave me a questioning look. How do you want to handle this? Transparently, I said without hesitation. The secret's out. It's time we operate with complete clarity about who leads this company. You know this changes everything, he warned. Some clients have worked with us because of relationships I've built over decades. They might not appreciate learning they've been dealing with the figurehead rather than the real power. Then they're not the clients we want, I replied firmly. Anyone who values results over ego will stay. The rest? They can take their business to Thompson and see how that works out for them. The executive team meeting was predictably tense. Our 8 senior directors, 4 women, 4 men, each handpicked for their exceptional abilities, sat around the conference table, expressions ranging from curious to concerned. I began without a preamble. I imagine you all have questions after last night's events. Let me address the most obvious one first. Yes, I am the majority shareholder of Taylor & Reed Consulting. This arrangement has been in place since the company's founding, but was kept confidential for strategic reasons. Marcus Holloway, our marketing director, leaned forward. With all due respect, why the secrecy? It feels somewhat deceptive. It was a business decision, Richard interjected before I could respond. When we launched, my industry connections were our primary asset. Olivia's expertise was our competitive advantage, but it was hidden behind the scenes. I nodded. In perfect honesty, it also allowed us to observe how clients and potential hires behaved. Those who respected every team member regardless of perceived status or title were the ones we wanted to work with. Grace Chen, our brilliant head of analytics who had been with us almost from the beginning, smiled slightly. That explains why I was interviewed by both of you when I was hired. Richard asked about my credentials, but you, Olivia, tested my actual skills with that impossible case study. Which you solved brilliantly, I acknowledged. But we're not here to discuss the past. We need to address 2 immediate challenges: the data breach perpetrated by Madison Taylor and how we move forward with our leadership structure now that it's public knowledge. For the next hour, we briefed the team on Madison's actions and our counter strategy against Thompson's strategic advisors. The executives were understandably shocked but rallied quickly, offering tactical suggestions and volunteering to reach out to clients who might be wavering after last night's drama. As the meeting concluded, I made a final announcement. Effective immediately, I'll be assuming the public role of CEO. Richard will transition to Chief Strategy Officer, focusing on what he does best, building relationships and identifying opportunities. This isn't a demotion, it's an optimization of our strengths. Any questions? The room was silent for a moment, then Grace spoke up. Just one. When can we update the website? If we're embracing transparency, I'd like to highlight the fact that we're woman-led in our marketing materials. It's actually a competitive advantage in this industry. For the first time that day, I smiled genuinely. I'll leave that in your capable hands, Grace. As the team filed out, energized rather than demoralized by the changes, Richard stayed behind. That went better than I expected. We've built a strong team, I said. They value competence over politics. My phone buzzed with a text from our legal counsel. Thompson CEO requesting urgent meeting. Claims no knowledge of son's activities. Damage control mode activated. I showed Richard the message. Ready to go on offense? He stood straighter, a tie. Familiar glint returning to his eyes. Always. The meeting with James Thompson took place on neutral territory, a private room at the University Club. The elder Thompson arrived alone, his normally imperious demeanor subdued. I brought our general, counsel, Sandra Peters, a former prosecutor with a reputation for ruthlessness in business litigation. This is an unfortunate situation, Thompson began after cursory greetings. I want to assure you that if my son has been involved in any impropriety, it was without my knowledge or consent. Sandra's expression remained professionally neutral as she slid a document across the table. We have evidence suggesting otherwise. This is a timeline correlating Madison Taylor's data breaches with specific strategic moves by your company. The pattern is remarkably aligned. Thompson's face flushed as he scanned the document. Circumstantial at best. Perhaps, I conceded, but persuasive enough for the FBI's Corporate Espionage Task Force, with whom we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow morning. Unless, of course, we can reach an understanding today. What kind of understanding? Thompson asked warily. I laid out our terms. Thompson's strategic advisors would withdraw completely from the Meridian Healthcare deal and 2 other accounts they had recently acquired through suspicious means. They would issue a public statement, acknowledging an internal compliance failure without specifically mentioning Madison or Wesley. And finally, Wesley Thompson would resign from his position immediately. This is extortion, Thompson sputtered. This is mercy, Richard countered, quietly. The alternative is a very public legal battle that would destroy your firm's reputation and possibly result in criminal charges against your son. Is that what you want, James? The fight seemed to drain out of Thompson. He was a businessman first, a father second. The cost-benefit analysis was clear. I'll need to consult with my board, he said finally. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow, I replied, standing to signal the meeting's end. After that, we'll be sitting across from federal agents instead of each other. Back at the office, we found Madison waiting in the reception area, her eyes red-rimmed, but her posture determined. I've completed my statement, she said, holding out a thick folder. Everything I shared, dates, times, what was said about how it would be used. I've also surrendered my personal laptop and phone to your security team. I accepted the folder. Thank you for your cooperation. She bit her lip, clearly struggling with what to say next. I've broken things off with Wesley. He wasn't who I thought he was. When I confronted him about using me to get information, he laughed, said I was naive to think business and pleasure didn't mix. Richard placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. I'm sorry you had to learn this lesson the hard way. I deserve whatever consequences come, she said, meeting my gaze directly. But I want you both to know I'm truly sorry, not just for getting caught, but for what I did. It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong even as I was doing it. The admission surprised me with its maturity. That's a start, Madison. Is there any chance, she asked hesitantly, that someday I might earn back a place here? Not as a Taylor, but as someone who has to prove herself like everyone else? Growth. I outlined our restructured leadership team, our new transparency initiatives, and our recommitment to the values that had quietly guided us from the beginning: meritocracy, integrity, and innovation. As I spoke, I could feel a weight lifting, the burden of pretending to be less than I was, of hiding behind someone else's shadow. Some of you have worked with me for years without knowing my true role in this company, I acknowledged. That changes today. Moving forward, Taylor & Reed will be known not just for what we do, but for who we truly are. The applause that followed wasn't just polite, it was thunderous. As I stepped away from the podium, I caught Richard's eye. He was applauding too, pride evident in his expression. We had weathered a crisis that might have destroyed a lesser partnership. In its wake, something stronger had emerged, a company no longer built on necessary illusions but standing firmly in its truth. As for Madison, her journey of redemption was just beginning. Whether she would ever return to Taylor & Reed remained an open question. But in confronting her mistakes with newfound honesty, she had taken her first step toward becoming someone worthy of the company's legacy, and perhaps, eventually, its future. 3 months after the gala incident, Taylor and I, Reed Consulting had transformed. Our hallmark discretion had given way to a bold transparency that resonated throughout the industry. Our rebranding campaign, Power Revealed, subtly nodded to our leadership transition while emphasizing our commitment to uncovering hidden value for clients. The early morning light streamed through my new corner office, Richard's old space, which he had insisted I take. "It's about time the actual CEO had the CEO's office," he'd said with characteristic grace. The transition had been smoother than either of us anticipated, our complementary strengths now openly acknowledged, and leveraged, my intercom buzzed. "Ms. Reed, Bradford Keene from Meridian Healthcare is on line 1. "Thank you, Janet. I'll take it." I pressed the button, settling into my chair. "Bradford, good morning." "Olivia." His deep voice carried a note of amusement. "Or should I say, Madam CEO, the business journals can't stop talking about you. Hidden power broker emerges as industry force." My favorite headline was, "The Secretary Who Secretly Built an Empire." I laughed. Hardly an empire, just a successful mid-size consulting firm with an unusual origin story. Don't diminish your accomplishments. It takes extraordinary vision to build what you have, and exceptional restraint to hide in plain sight for so long. He paused. "That's actually why I'm calling. Our board was impressed by how you handled the Thompson situation. They're ready to move forward with the acquisition strategy you proposed, this time with Taylor & Reed as our exclusive advisors." The Meridian deal, the very one Madison had compromised, was back on the table, potentially worth even more now that the healthcare company had posted another quarter of impressive growth. "I'm delighted to hear that, Bradford. I'll have our team prepare an updated proposal reflecting current market conditions." "Excellent. And Olivia? The board specifically requested that you personally oversee this project. No delegates. They want the architect, not the draftsman." After we disconnected, I sat back, savoring the moment. This was what vindication felt like, not the dramatic confrontation at the gala, but this quiet professional acknowledgement of my value. The request for my personal involvement signaled more than just a lucrative contract. It represented a fundamental shift in how clients perceived our firm and my role within it. My reflections were interrupted by a knock at the door. Richard entered, followed by Grace Chen and Marcus Holloway. "The quarterly numbers are in," Richard announced, his expression giving nothing away. Grace placed a folder on my desk, allowing herself a small smile. "You might want to sit down for this?" I raised an eyebrow. "I am sitting." "Then hold on to something," Marcus suggested, grinning broadly. "Our new client acquisition rate is up 37% since the leadership announcement. Retention of existing clients stands at 94%, slightly down from our historic high of 98%, but significantly better than the 80% worst-case scenario we projected." I flipped through the detailed reports, absorbing the figures. What about the Thompson clients we required them to release? Have they all transitioned to us? All 3, Grace confirmed. Plus 2 others who jumped ship after the news broke about their compliance issues. Apparently, nothing motivates client migration like suspicion of corporate espionage. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Madison's betrayal, intended to harm our company while advancing her boyfriend's career, had ultimately expanded our client base and torpedoed Wesley Thompson's prospects. Last I'd heard, he was struggling to find work, his father's powerful connections insufficient to overcome the taint of scandal. There's something else, Richard said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Elena and I had dinner with Madison last night. The mention of Madison's name sent a slight tension through the room. While the executive team knew the bare outlines of what had occurred, we had contained the full details of her actions to protect both the company and, truthfully, Richard's family. How is she? I asked cautiously. Different. Richard shook his head slightly, as if still processing the change. The entitlement is gone. She's working as an administrative assistant at a nonprofit focused on financial literacy for underserved communities. Minimum wage, sharing an apartment with 2 roommates. My surprise must have shown on my face. Madison had grown up with every privilege: private schools, luxury vacations, a trust fund that ensured she'd never truly need to work. The image of her living paycheck to paycheck was difficult to reconcile with the young woman who had sneered at me for being just a secretary. Her choice, apparently, Richard continued. She withdrew from her trust fund voluntarily, told the bank to freeze access until she's 30. She says she wants to understand the value of earning her own way. That's unexpected, I admitted. Marcus cleared his throat. Should we give you 2 a moment to discuss this privately? I shook my head. No need. Madison's situation affects all of us, given what happened. What else did she say, Richard? She asked about the company. Not prying for information, just genuine interest in how we're doing. And he hesitated. She asked if I thought there might ever be a path back, not to leadership, just to being part of what we've built. Maybe starting in an entry-level position once she's proven herself elsewhere. The question hung in the air. Despite my initial anger at Madison's betrayal, I had never wanted to destroy her relationship with her father or permanently derail her life. Redemption had always been possible. But was it time? What do you think? I asked Richard, genuinely curious about his perspective. I think she's my daughter and I love her, he said carefully. But I also think this company is bigger than my family, and her actions hurt everyone here. If she ever returns, it needs to be because she's earned it, not because she's a tailor. Grace, who had remained silent during this exchange, spoke up. If I may? The data analytics team has an opening for a junior associate. Entry-level, heavy on spreadsheets and detail work. It would keep her far from sensitive client information, but give her a foot in the door. We could implement enhanced monitoring protocols as a precaution. I considered the suggestion. Let me think about it. Whatever we decide needs to be a business decision, not an emotional one. After they left, I stood by the window, watching the Chicago skyline shimmer in the midday sun. The Madison question wasn't merely about one young woman's redemption. It represented a key leadership test. How we handled the situation would send signals throughout the organization about our values and priorities. My phone buzzed with a text from Sandra, our general counsel. NY Times reporter requesting interview about women who hide their power. I think your story could anchor a trend piece. Interested? Another complication. The media attention had been both flattering and frustrating, focusing often on the sensational aspects of my secret boss status rather than our business accomplishments. Yet each interview was an opportunity to reshape the narrative, to ensure that our company's future wasn't defined solely by its unusual past. I texted back, schedule for next week. We'll review talking points Monday. I exchanged glances with Richard. That depends on many factors, including the outcome of our legal situation with Thompson. But I believe in second chances, when they're truly earned. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement that redemption might be possible. For now, that was all any of us could offer. The next morning, 15 minutes before our deadline, James Thompson called to accept our terms. By noon, Thompson's strategic advisors had issued their carefully worded statement about compliance failures and withdrawn from our targeted accounts. By the end of the day, news of Wesley Thompson's resignation had spread throughout the industry. 1 week later, I stood at the podium during our emergency all-hands meeting, addressing our entire staff for the first time as the publicly acknowledged CEO of Taylor & Reed Consulting. The events of the past week have forced us to evolve faster than we planned, I began, looking out at the sea of attentive faces. But evolution is often the catalyst for greater strength. Today, we're announcing several changes that will position us for sustainable. The intercom buzzed again. Ms. Reed, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite persistent. Who is it, Janet? A brief hesitation. Madison Taylor. My heart rate quickened. Madison hadn't been to the office since the day of her suspension. Her appearance now was unexpected and potentially problematic. Did she say what this is regarding? Just that it's personal and urgent. Should I send her away? I checked my calendar. My next meeting wasn't for an hour. No, send her in. But Janet, stay nearby, please. Madison entered moments later, almost unrecognizable from the polished, overconfident young woman who had strutted through these offices months ago. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple blouse and slacks. Her hair, once professionally styled, was pulled back in a practical ponytail. But the most striking change was in her demeanor. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a cautious humility. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, remaining standing until I gestured to a chair. "I won't take much of your time." "What can I do for you, Madison?" I kept my tone neutral, professional. She placed a manila envelope on my desk. "These came into my possession recently. I thought you should have them." Curious, I opened the envelope and extracted several documents, old performance reviews from my days at Pinnacle Industries, along with emails discussing my contributions and ideas. Each clearly showed how my work had been appropriated by others, particularly Victor Hammond, my former boss. "Where did you get these?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Wesley," she said, surprising me. "After everything fell apart, he became vindictive. He started gathering information about you, looking for vulnerabilities. He reached out to contacts at Pinnacle, trying to build some kind of case that you were bitter about your treatment there, and had fabricated the evidence against him out of resentment." A chill ran through me at the calculated malice such a plan revealed. "And these documents?" "They proved the opposite of what he hoped. They showed that you were systematically undervalued and your work stolen for years. When I saw them, She looked down at her hands. "I realized I'd done to you exactly what was done to you at Pinnacle. I became the very thing I now despise." The admission hung between us, raw and honest. For the first time, I saw in Madison not Richard's entitled daughter, but a young woman capable of genuine self-reflection. "Thank you for bringing these to me," I said carefully. "Though I'm curious why Wesley shared his strategy with you after your relationship ended." A flush crept up her neck. "He didn't. I hacked his email." My eyebrows shot up. "You what?" "I know how that sounds, especially after everything," she said quickly. "But when I heard rumors that he was trying to discredit you, I felt responsible. I still had his password. He'd given it to me when we were dating. I logged in to warn you if there was actually something happening." I shouldn't have been amused, but something about the irony of the situation, Madison using the same questionable tactics that had gotten her into trouble, but this time to protect rather than harm the company, struck me as darkly funny. "That was ill-advised," I said, keeping my expression stern despite my internal reaction. Though I appreciate the sentiment behind it. I've already deleted the access and sent him an anonymous tip to change his password, she added hastily. I'm not planning to make a habit of unauthorized access. We sat in silence for a moment, the atmosphere charged with unspoken questions. Dad mentioned you had dinner last night, I finally said. He tells me you're working in the nonprofit sector. Madison nodded. Financial literacy education. The irony isn't lost on me. Teaching others about responsible financial behavior. After my own spectacular lapse in judgment, she smiled faintly. I actually love it, though. It's meaningful work. Do you miss the corporate world? I asked, watching her reaction carefully. Her response was measured, thoughtful. I miss the intellectual challenge. The nonprofit work is rewarding, but not particularly complex. What I don't miss is the person I was becoming in this environment. Entitled, calculating, willing to compromise ethics for advancement. People can change contexts without changing character, I observed. The ethical lapses weren't inevitable. No, she agreed. They were choices. Bad ones. Which is why... She straightened her posture, meeting my gaze directly. I'm not here to ask for my job back. Not yet. I haven't earned that. But I would like to know if there's a path forward. What steps I would need to take, what trust I would need to rebuild, to someday be considered for a role here. Not as Richard Taylor's daughter, but as someone who can contribute value. The question didn't surprise me after Richard's earlier comments, but her approach did. There was no hint of entitlement, no assumption that redemption was guaranteed. Why Taylor and Reed? I asked. With your education and background, even with the Thompson scandal, you could likely find a position elsewhere. Somewhere with less complicated history. Madison considered the question seriously. Because anywhere else would be running away, and because despite everything, I believe in what you and my father have built. Not just the business success, but the values beneath it, even if I failed to honor them myself. I studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. The Madison before me seemed genuine, but I had been fooled by her before. If, and this is a significant if, we were to consider a path back for you, it would need to be structured with clear metrics and boundaries, I said finally. Entry-level position, no access to sensitive information, regular reviews, essentially probation, professionally speaking, and it wouldn't happen immediately. Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly tempered by realism. I understand. I wouldn't expect anything else. I'll discuss it with the executive team, I promised. In the meantime, I suggest you continue your current work. The experience of starting at the bottom has clearly been valuable for you. As Madison stood to leave, she paused. Ms. Reed, Olivia, there's something else I've wanted to say to you. An apology feels inadequate after what I did, but I am truly sorry. Not just for the betrayal of company information, but for how I treated you personally. The dismissive comments, the condescension. It was inexcusable. Why did you? I asked, curious about a question that had lingered for months. You hardly knew me, yet your contempt seemed so immediate. Madison's expression turned inward, reflective. Insecurity, mostly. You had my father's respect in a way I feared I never would. It was easier to diminish you than to acknowledge that you had earned something I assumed was my birthright. She shook her head. It sounds so petty now. Most human failings are when examined closely, I observed. Even the dramatic ones often have mundane roots. After Madison left, I remained at my desk, contemplating our conversation. The documents she had brought were a reminder of how far I had come from my days of silent submission at Pinnacle, and how easily others could still attempt to undermine me. The intercom buzzed yet again. Ms. Reed, the senior partners from Bergman & Associates are here for their scheduled introduction. Conference room A is ready. Thank you, Janet. I'll be right there. As I gathered my materials for the meeting, I made a mental note to discuss Madison's situation with Richard and the executive team later that day. The decision about her future with the company wouldn't be simple, but complexity was part of leadership. In bringing her concerns directly to me rather than leveraging her relationship with her father, Madison had demonstrated a significant shift in her understanding of proper business conduct. The journey from just a secretary to acknowledged CEO had been long and at times painful. Yet, as I walked toward the conference room, aware of the respectful nods from employees who now fully understood my role, I recognized that the most valuable aspect of power wasn't having it. It was using it wisely. And sometimes, wisdom meant offering others the second chances I had needed myself along the way. 6 months after Madison's unexpected office visit, Taylor & Reed Consulting had entered a new phase of growth. The Meridian Healthcare acquisition had closed successfully, generating $5.7 million in fees, significantly higher than our original projections. Our client roster had expanded by 22%, and we'd opened a satellite office in Boston to better serve our East Coast clients. The executive team had gathered in our newly renovated conference room for our monthly strategy session. The glass walls offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan, today's waters choppy under gray skies threatening snow. Q4 projections suggest we'll exceed annual targets by approximately 17%, Grace reported, her analytical precision unchanged despite her recent promotion to Chief Data Officer. The reputational boost from the Meridian deal continues to generate inquiries from previously unreachable prospects. Marcus nodded in agreement. The Power Revealed campaign has evolved beyond damage control into a genuine brand differentiator. 3 industry publications have requested profiles focused on our diverse leadership structure. I glanced at the empty chair beside Sandra, our general counsel. Speaking of leadership, any updates on the COO search? Richard cleared his throat. The headhunter has narrowed it to 5 candidates. Final interviews next week, though I still think we should consider internal promotion. The Chief Operating Officer position had been created during our restructuring, designed to manage day-to-day operations, while Richard and I focused on strategy and client relationships. Finding the right person had proven challenging. We needed someone detail-oriented yet visionary, tough yet diplomatic. We've discussed this, I reminded him gently. None of our current directors has the comprehensive operational experience we need for this role. The underlying tension wasn't about qualifications but about Madison. Though never explicitly stated, Richard clearly hoped that creating a structured advancement path might eventually lead to a legitimate leadership role for his daughter. It wasn't unreasonable. Family businesses often planned for succession. But the timing felt premature given Madison's history. Our discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. Janet entered, looking uncharacteristically flustered. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent situation. Victor Hammond is in reception, demanding to speak with Olivia. He's quite insistent." The name sent a jolt through me. Victor Hammond, my former boss at Pinnacle Industries, the man who had taken credit for my work and dismissed my potential for years. I hadn't spoken to him since leaving Pinnacle. "Did he say what this is regarding?" I asked, maintaining my composure despite the surprise. "Only that it's a matter of mutual interest, and that he won't leave until he sees you." Richard's protective instincts flared. "Tell security to escort him out. We don't respond to demands or threats." I raised my hand. "No, I'll speak with him, but not alone." I glanced at Sandra. "Would you join us in my office? And Janet, please. Ask security to stand by, just in case." 5 minutes later, Victor Hammond sat across from me, looking considerably less polished than during his Pinnacle days. His designer suit hung loosely on his frame, and deep lines etched his once smooth face. Sandra sat beside me, silent, but watchful. "Victor," I said evenly, "this is unexpected. Believe me, Olivia, I wouldn't be here if I had any alternative. His voice carried none of the patronizing tone I remembered. Congratulations on your success, by the way. The business journals can't stop singing your praises. Thank you. Now, what brings you to Taylor & Reed? He shifted uncomfortably. I'm in trouble, Olivia. Serious trouble. Pinnacle is accusing me of financial improprieties, manipulating reports, falsifying data to boost my division's performance. I raised an eyebrow. And this concerns me how? Because I didn't do it. At least not all of it. He leaned forward. Someone has systematically altered records from the periods when you worked for me, making it appear that I orchestrated widespread fraud. The timing of these supposed activities coincides exactly with projects you led. My mind raced, connecting dots. Wesley Thompson's vindictive information gathering. Madison's warning about his plan to discredit me. The documents she had recovered showed how my work had been appropriated. Are you suggesting I framed you? I asked, my voice dangerously. Quiet! No, God, no. Victor looked genuinely alarmed. I'm saying someone with intimate knowledge of our working relationship has manufactured evidence against me. Evidence that falsely links me to financial misconduct during precisely the time frames when you did most of the analytical work. Sandra intervened. Mr. Hammond, are you under formal investigation? Internal audit for now, but if their findings stand, Pinnacle will involve the SEC. He turned back to me, desperation evident. Olivia, you know how I operated. I took credit for your ideas, yes. I overlooked you for the promotions you deserved. I was a terrible boss in many ways, but I never falsified financial data. That would be career suicide. I studied him, weighing his words against my knowledge of the man. Victor had been ambitious, entitled, and dismissive of my contributions, but not dishonest in financial matters. If anything, his rigid adherence to regulatory compliance had been one of his few redeeming qualities. Why come to me? I asked. If you believe I had nothing to do with this, what do you expect from me? Your help. He reached into his briefcase, extracting a folder. These are the manipulated reports. The analytical methodology used to falsify the data is sophisticated, similar to models you developed for acquisition valuation. I need someone who understands both the original work and how it could be weaponized. Sandra took the folder, scanning the contents. Mr. Hammond, sharing these documents with outside parties could violate confidentiality agreements with Pinnacle. I'm aware of the risk, he said grimly. But if I don't clear my name, I'm facing potential criminal charges. I'm betting on Olivia's integrity, even if I never fully appreciated it when she worked for me. The irony was almost painful. Victor Hammond, who had dismissed me as just an assistant for years, now needed my expertise to save his career. The universe had a darkly poetic sense of justice. I'll need to review these materials carefully, I said, not committing yet, and consult with our legal team about potential conflicts of interest. We'll contact you once we've made a determination. After Victor left, Sandra turned to me. This feels like a trap. If you get involved and can't exonerate him, he could claim you manipulated evidence out of resentment. Or it could be an opportunity, I mused. If someone is targeting Victor by exploiting our past working relationship, they might not stop with him. Better to understand the threat now than be blindsided later. I returned to the conference room, where the executive team waited curiously. I briefed them on Victor's unexpected visit, watching their reactions carefully. It's clearly connected to Thompson's vendetta, Richard said immediately. Too coincidental otherwise. Grace frowned. But how would Thompson access internal Pinnacle financial records? That level of corporate espionage requires sophistication beyond what we've seen from him. Unless he's working with someone inside. Pinnacle, Marcus suggested. Someone with both access and a grudge. The implication hung heavily in the air. Despite our best containment efforts, news of Madison's corporate espionage had circulated in industry circles. If Wesley Thompson had indeed escalated to targeting both Victor and potentially me, the situation required careful handling. We need more information, I decided. Sandra, please conduct a preliminary risk assessment regarding any involvement with Hammond's situation. Grace, assemble a small team to review these financial materials, strictly confidential, highest security protocols. As the meeting concluded, Richard lingered behind. You know who might be helpful with this? Madison. I gave him a skeptical look. How do you figure? She knows Wesley better than anyone. If he's behind this, she might recognize his patterns, identify his potential collaborators. And after what she did with his email, we know she has certain technical skills that might be valuable in this context. You're seriously suggesting we involve Madison in a highly sensitive investigation after what happened? Richard held my gaze steadily. She's been working in our data analytics department for 3 months now. Grace reports she's been exemplary, diligent, ethical, and extraordinarily careful about boundaries. This could be an opportunity to demonstrate trust while utilizing her unique perspective. I sighed, acknowledging the complexity of the situation. Let me think about it overnight. No promises. That evening, I worked late, reviewing Victor's documents while snowflakes swirled outside my window. The data manipulation was indeed sophisticated, subtle enough to pass cursory audit reviews but devastating under forensic examination. Whoever had engineered this understood both financial modeling and how to weaponize it against specific targets. Soft knock interrupted my concentration. Madison stood in the doorway, holding a stack of reports. Grace asked me to drop these financial projections off before I left, she explained, placing them on the edge of my desk. She turned to go, then hesitated. I don't mean to overstep, but you look troubled. Is everything all right? Something in her genuine concern made me reconsider Richard's suggestion. Actually, I could use a fresh perspective. Do you have a few minutes? Surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by attentiveness. Of course. I outlined Victor. Hammond's situation without revealing confidential details, explaining the pattern of targeted financial manipulation and the potential connection to Wesley. Madison listened intently, her analytical mind visibly processing the information. When I finished, she asked, "May I see one of the manipulated reports? Just the methodology, not the actual data." I slid a redacted page across the desk. She studied it carefully, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "This looks familiar," she said finally. "Not the content, but the approach. Wesley once showed me a project he was working on, supposedly a theoretical exercise for an advanced financial modeling course. It involved creating undetectable alterations to financial statements that would only become apparent under specific analytical conditions." "When was this?" I asked, my concern deepening. "About 2 weeks before the data breach incident." She handed the document back, her distress evident. "If this is Wesley's work, it's not impulsive. It's calculated, long-term. He might have been planning this even while we were dating." The implications were chilling. If Wesley had targeted Victor Hammond, a relatively minor figure in my past, as part of a larger scheme to undermine me, what else might he have planned? "Thank you for the insight," I said. "This helps clarify some concerns." Madison nodded, then added hesitantly, "I know I've only recently rejoined the company, and I have no right to make suggestions, but if Wesley is behind this, I might be able to help. I know how he thinks, his blind spots, his contacts, and I have a vested interest in stopping him." "Your father suggested something similar earlier today," I admitted. I was reluctant, given the sensitive nature of the situation, and frankly, your history. She accepted this without defensiveness. "That's fair. My actions damaged trust and I'm still rebuilding it. But if there's any way I can help protect the company from Wesley's vendetta, a vendetta I may have inadvertently helped create, I'd like to try. I studied her, noting the changes 6 months had wrought. The entitlement had vanished, replaced by a grounded humility. Her work in our data analytics department had been impeccable, her interactions with colleagues respectful and professional. The transformation appeared genuine. I'll discuss it with the team tomorrow, I decided. If we involve you, it would be in a limited capacity, with appropriate supervision. But your insights could be valuable. Thank you for considering it, she said, turning to leave. At the door, she paused. Olivia, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For what Victor Hammond did to you at Pinnacle. Taking credit for someone else's work, diminishing their contributions, I understand now how deeply that cuts. After she left, I sat contemplating the strange parallels unfolding. Victor Hammond had dismissed me as just an assistant while exploiting my work. Madison had labeled me just a secretary while undermining the company. Now both sought redemption. Victor, out of desperation, Madison seemingly from genuine remorse. The next morning, I convened a special task force comprising Sandra, Grace, Richard, and, against some internal hesitation, Madison. We established clear protocols. Madison would analyze Wesley's potential methods and motives, but would have no access to the original Pinnacle documents or any communication with Victor Hammond. Over the next 2 weeks, a disturbing pattern emerged. The financial manipulations at Pinnacle were indeed consistent with Wesley's methodologies. More concerning, Madison discovered through legitimate channels that Wesley had recently been hired as a consultant by Vanguard Capital, a private equity firm currently attempting a hostile takeover of Pinnacle Industries. It's elegant, in a twisted way, Madison explained as we reviewed her findings. By discrediting Victor Hammond, Wesley creates upheaval in Pinnacle's financial leadership. The resulting uncertainty weakens their stock price and board confidence, making them more vulnerable to Vanguard's takeover attempt. And how does this connect to his vendetta against Olivia? Sandra asked. Madison hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Based on things Wesley said when we were dating, I believe his ultimate goal is to facilitate Vanguard's acquisition of Pinnacle, then orchestrate a merger between the newly acquired entity and Thomson Strategic Advisors. One of his frequent complaints was that Taylor and Reed, specifically Olivia, had stolen clients that rightfully belonged to his family's firm. So this is about revenge and market share, Richard summarized. With the added benefit of potentially implicating me in financial fraud, I noted grimly. If Victor is investigated and the trail leads back to work I supervised, I could become collateral damage. The threat was clear, as was our response. With Victor's reluctant cooperation, we constructed a counter-strategy. Sandra would approach Pinnacle's general counsel with evidence of external manipulation, while Grace's team would document the technical anomalies proving the fraud was artificially engineered. Meanwhile, Richard would discreetly inform key industry contacts about Wesley's questionable activities without making explicit allegations. Madison's role remained consultative, but her insights proved crucial in anticipating Wesley's next moves. She worked tirelessly, often late into the night, reviewing patterns and suggesting countermeasures. 3 weeks into our investigation, the first victory came. Pinnacle announced they were suspending their internal audit of Victor Hammond pending. New information. A week later, Vanguard Capital withdrew their takeover bid after several major investors questioned the timing and motivation behind the attempt. The final blow came when an anonymous whistleblower, never officially identified, though Madison's knowing smile when the news broke told its own story, provided the SEC with evidence linking Wesley Thompson to manipulated financial models at 3 different companies under investigation. By the time the dust settled, Wesley Thompson had been placed on indefinite leave from his consulting position. Thomson Strategic Advisors had lost several major clients, and Victor Hammond had been fully exonerated. though his reputation would never completely recover from the ordeal. In an ironic twist, Victor approached me with a job offer. Pinnacle's board recognizes they need stronger analytical leadership, he explained. They've authorized me to offer you the position of Chief Analytics Officer, reporting directly to the CEO. I declined politely but firmly. I'm exactly where I need to be, Victor. But thank you for thinking of me. His expression reflected genuine regret. I should have seen your potential years ago. My biggest professional mistake was underestimating you. One of many people's mistakes, I observed with a small smile. Though lately it's happening less frequently. After Victor left, I found Madison waiting in the outer office. I heard Pinnacle offered you a position, she said. Poetic justice, isn't it? Life rarely offers such neat symmetry, I agreed. Though in this case, I prefer where I am to where I might have been. She nodded thoughtfully. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to help with this situation. I know it required trust I hadn't fully earned yet. You proved that trust was warranted, I said, making a decision I'd been contemplating for days. Which is why the executive team has approved your promotion to team lead in data analytics, effective next month. It's still a junior management position, but it's a step toward rebuilding your path here. Her eyes widened. Really? After everything? Your actions during this crisis demonstrated integrity, analytical rigor, and commitment to the company's well-being. Those are the qualities we value, regardless of last name or past mistakes. As Madison processed this news, I added, Your father doesn't know yet. I wanted you to hear it first, to understand this wasn't nepotism, but recognition of genuine merit. Thank you, she said simply, emotion making her voice slightly unsteady. I won't let you down. Watching her walk away, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. From being dismissed as just a secretary to standing firmly acknowledged as CEO. From Madison's entitled condescension to her earned redemption. From hiding in the shadows of my own company to leading it openly. Power revealed was indeed a fitting tagline for our transformation, not just organizational but personal. In revealing who truly held power, we had all discovered something essential about its proper use. Not as a weapon to diminish others, but as a tool to elevate those with potential, even those who had once failed to recognize it in themselves. 1. Year after the Victor Hammond incident, Taylor & Reed Consulting had evolved beyond recognition from the boutique firm Richard and I had founded. Our staff had grown to nearly 200 professionals across 3 offices, Chicago, Boston, and our newest location in San Francisco. The company's valuation had tripled, and industry publications regularly cited us as a case study in progressive leadership and organizational transparency. The Winter Gala, our first since the fateful night when Madison had discovered my true position, was in full swing at the Field Museum. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over exhibits and elegantly dressed guests, the unusual venue reflecting our company's commitment to thinking differently. I stood near the massive Tyrannosaurus skeleton dominating the main hall, observing the crowd. Richard chatted animatedly with clients near the bar, his natural charisma unchanged despite his new role as CSO rather than figurehead CEO. Madison, now a respected junior executive in our analytics division, conducted a small group tour of the prehistoric exhibit, explaining how data modeling could predict extinction patterns, a surprisingly appropriate metaphor for our work in corporate restructuring. Quite the transformation, noted a familiar voice beside me. I turned to find Bradford Keene from Meridian Healthcare, champagne in hand. The museum? I asked, smiling. The company and its people. He nodded toward Madison, particularly that young woman. Hard to believe she's the same person who created such a spectacular scene last year. People can surprise you, I observed. Sometimes even themselves. Indeed. Speaking of surprises, I hear Thomson Strategic Advisors is exploring acquisition offers. Apparently, the fallout from young Thompson's indiscretions has been more damaging than initially reported. This was news to me. Any serious contenders? Bradford shrugged. Rumor suggests preliminary talks with Montgomery Global. Though, industry scuttlebutt says James Thompson would prefer a friendlier landing. The implication hung in the air between us. Montgomery Global was known for acquiring struggling firms, extracting their client lists, and discarding the remnants. If Thompson was entertaining their offer, his situation must be dire indeed. Interesting, was all I said, filing the information away for later consideration. Bradford's attention shifted to something behind me. Ah, and here comes your miracle worker now. I turned to see Nolan Pierce, our newly appointed Chief Operating Officer, approaching, with purposeful strides. At 42, Nolan brought a wealth of operational experience from his tenure at several Fortune 500 companies. His hiring 6 months ago had initially raised eyebrows. He had been an outside candidate when many expected the role to go to an internal promotion. Yet his impact had been undeniable, streamlining processes and enhancing interdepartmental collaboration while respecting our unique corporate culture. Sorry to interrupt, Nolan said, nodding respectfully to Bradford. But the Westridge team just arrived, and they're asking about the Singapore expansion. I thought you'd want to be part of that conversation. Absolutely. Bradford, if you'll... Excuse me? Of course. We'll catch up later. As Nolan and I navigated through the crowd, he briefed me on the Westridge executive's concerns. I noticed Madison watching us from across the room, her expression unreadable. Despite her professional growth and evident commitment to rebuilding trust, I sometimes caught these moments, fleeting looks that suggested complicated feelings about Nolan's role, the position some had anticipated might eventually be hers. The evening progressed smoothly until an unexpected commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. James Thompson, patriarch of Thomson Strategic Advisors and Wesley's father, stood in the doorway, scanning the crowd with grim determination. Richard materialized at my side instantly. What is he doing here? He wasn't invited. Let's find out, I said calmly, though my pulse quickened. Our companies had maintained a cold peace since the corporate espionage incident, with minimal direct interaction. We approached James together, presenting a unified front. Up close, the elder Thompson looked diminished since our last encounter, his confident bearing undermined by new lines of strain around his eyes. James, Richard acknowledged coolly. This is unexpected. Richard. Ms. Reed. Thompson's voice carried none of its former arrogance. I apologize for crashing your event. I need to speak with you both. Privately, if possible. I exchanged glances with Richard before answering. The curator's office is available. This way. As we led him through a side door into a quiet administrative area, I noticed Madison observing the interaction, concern evident in her expression. I gave her a subtle nod of reassurance before closing the door behind us. The curator's office was modestly furnished with academic functionality, bookshelves lined with reference volumes, a desk cluttered with papers, and several uncomfortable-looking chairs. James Thompson sank into one as if physically burdened. I'll be direct, he began without preamble. Thomson Strategic Advisors is in trouble. Serious trouble. The scandal with Wesley damaged us far more than I initially admitted. We've lost 40% of our client base in the past 18 months. Richard maintained a neutral expression. I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure why you're bringing this to us. James exhaled heavily. Because I'm exploring options to salvage what's left. Montgomery Global has made an offer, but they're vultures. They'll strip the assets and discard the rest, including most of our staff. Again, while unfortunate, this isn't our concern, I noted, though I was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. What if I offered you the first right of refusal? James said quietly. A merger between Thomson Strategic and Taylor and Reed. The proposal hung in the air, stunning in its unexpectedness. Richard recovered first. You can't be serious. Deadly serious. James leaned forward. Your company is ascendant. Mine is declining, but still has valuable assets, client relationships, specialized expertise in sectors you haven't fully penetrated, a West Coast presence stronger than your new San Francisco outpost, and significant reputational baggage, I pointed out. The ethics violations alone make this problematic, which is why the Thomson name would disappear, he conceded. Full absorption into Taylor and Reed. I'm not delusional about my negotiating position. What about Wesley? Richard asked, the question unavoidable. James's expression hardened. Wesley is no longer with the firm. His actions nearly destroyed a company my father built from nothing. He'll receive no further support from me, professionally or otherwise. The ruthless pragmatism was almost admirable, if cold-blooded. And your role in this theoretical merger? I asked. Advisory only, with a defined transition period. I'm not seeking leadership, Ms. Reed. I'm seeking a lifeboat for loyal employees who don't deserve to go down with the ship because of my son's mistakes and my own failures of oversight. Richard and I exchanged evaluative glances, a wordless communication honed through years of partnership. The proposal wasn't as outlandish as it initially seemed. Thomson Strategic, despite its recent troubles, still maintained valuable client relationships in entertainment and healthcare sectors where our presence was limited. We'd need to conduct extensive due diligence, I said, neither accepting or rejecting the idea. Complete transparency on finances, client contracts, ongoing litigation, everything. Of course. And this conversation remains confidential until there's something concrete to discuss, Richard added firmly. James nodded. I've already said more publicly than I should have. My board doesn't even know I'm here tonight. After establishing basic parameters for preliminary discussions, we escorted James out through a side entrance to avoid further disruption to the gala. As he departed, he turned back with uncharacteristic humility. I misjudged you, Ms. Reed, when we first negotiated after the incident with Madison. I thought your hardline stance was vindictiveness. I see now it was principled leadership. Something I could have exercised more of myself. After he left, Richard shook his head in wonderment. James Thomson, coming to us hat in hand. I never thought I'd see the day. The business landscape changes quickly, I mused. Today's competitor becomes tomorrow's acquisition target. We should discuss this with the executive team before proceeding further. We returned to the gala, maintaining professional smiles despite the bombshell proposal we'd just received. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the museum's grand staircase beside Madison, both of us taking a momentary breather from the constant socializing. Quite different from last year's gala, she observed, the understatement carrying a wealth of unspoken history. Indeed, no scandalous revelations or dramatic confrontations. Almost disappointing. She laughed softly. I think we've had enough drama to last several careers. Her expression grew more serious. Though Thomson's appearance seemed significant. Anything I should know about? I considered how much to share. Madison had proven her loyalty repeatedly over the past year, earning incremental trust through consistent performance and ethical conduct. Her insights on Wesley had been invaluable during the Victor Hammond situation. Potentially, I acknowledged. Thomson Strategic is struggling, and James is exploring options that might involve us. Nothing concrete yet. Madison absorbed this with thoughtful consideration. A merger would be complex, given the history. Very. Though business often requires separating personal history from strategic opportunity. She nodded, silent for a moment, before asking, would Wesley be part of any such arrangement? No. According to James, that relationship is severed permanently. Relief flickered across her features. Good. His presence would make integration impossible. The maturity of her response impressed me. A year ago, she might have reacted emotionally or defensively to any mention of Wesley. Now she assessed the situation from a business perspective, acknowledging complications without being derailed by them. "Your father and I will be discussing this with the executive team tomorrow," I said. "As analytics team lead, your perspective would be valuable, particularly regarding cultural integration challenges." She straightened slightly, recognizing the professional acknowledgement. "I'd be honored to contribute." The following morning, our executive boardroom buzzed with animated discussion as I outlined James Thompson's unexpected proposal. Reactions ranged from skeptical, Sandra and Marcus, to cautiously intrigued, Grace and Nolan. "The potential client synergies are significant," Nolan acknowledged, reviewing preliminary numbers. "Their entertainment industry portfolio would complement our technology focus, potentially opening new market segments." "At what reputational cost?" Sandra countered. "We've built our brand on ethical leadership and transparency. Thompson is tainted by scandal." Richard, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "We're not considering this out of sentimentality or forgiveness. This is purely business. Thompson has assets worth acquiring, but only at the right price and structure. And with appropriate risk mitigation," I added. "Sandra, I'd like your team to conduct exhaustive compliance reviews. Grace, we need comprehensive data analysis on client retention probabilities post-merger." Madison, seated at the far end of the table as the most junior executive present, listened attentively, but hadn't yet spoken. I intentionally brought her into the conversation. "Madison, you have unique insight into Thompson's culture. What integration challenges would you anticipate?" All eyes turned to her. She took a moment to gather her thoughts, her response measured and professional. "Thompson operates with a hierarchical structure that differs significantly from our collaborative model. Their middle management particularly might struggle with our decision-making processes. Additionally, there's likely residual loyalty to the Thompson family among long-tenured staff that could complicate absorption into our brand." She paused, then added, "However, recent departures have likely removed the most resistant elements. Those who've remained through the company's difficulties may be more adaptable by necessity. I'd recommend targeted retention packages for key personnel paired with clear cultural expectations from day one." Nolan nodded approvingly. "Excellent analysis. We could structure integration teams with representatives from both organizations, focused on specific departments or client segments." The discussion continued for nearly 3 hours, evolving from initial reactions to concrete action items. By the end, we had established a due diligence protocol and assigned preliminary responsibilities for evaluating various aspects of the potential acquisition. As the meeting concluded, Richard lingered behind with me. "Proud of her," he said quietly, nodding toward Madison, who was engaged in animated conversation with Grace and Nolan. A year ago, the mere mention of Thompson would have triggered an emotional response. Today she provided the most objective analysis in the room. "She's earned her place at that table," I agreed. "Not as your daughter, but as a valuable contributor to this company." The weeks that followed were intensive, with specialized teams conducting thorough investigations into Thompson Strategic's finances, client contracts, and potential liabilities. The findings were mixed, some areas stronger than anticipated, others concerning enough to require structural solutions in any potential agreement. Throughout the process, Madison maintained professional distance from her past connection to the I Thompson organization, focusing instead on data-driven analysis of compatibility factors. Her work particularly impressed James Thompson during joint sessions, her thoroughness and objectivity visibly catching him off guard, given their limited but fraught personal history. "She's nothing like the young woman Wesley described," he commented to me during a break in negotiations. He portrayed her as naive and easily manipulated. "People evolve when given the right environment," I replied neutrally. Madison found her authentic professional identity here, once expectations were clarified. After 6 weeks of intensive review, our executive team reconvened to make a final decision. The proposed structure had evolved considerably. Rather than a complete merger, we would acquire specific divisions of Thomson Strategic, primarily their entertainment and healthcare practices, along with selected personnel. The Thomson name would be retired, with James serving as a consultant for 12 months to facilitate client transitions. The vote was unanimous in favor of proceeding, with detailed implementation plans for each phase of the acquisition. As the meeting adjourned, I asked Madison to remain behind. "You've conducted yourself with remarkable professionalism throughout this process," I told her once we were alone, "particularly given your personal history with the Thomson organization." She smiled slightly. "I had an excellent example of separating personal feelings from professional judgment." "Oh? You," she said simply. "After how I treated you, you could have banished me permanently from this company. Instead, you evaluated my potential contribution objectively and gave me an opportunity to earn back trust. I've tried to apply that same principle to this situation." The observation caught me by surprise, not for its insight, but because I hadn't consciously recognized the parallel myself. "The executive team has approved a new position as part of the restructuring," I said after a moment. "Director of Integration Strategy, overseeing the cultural and operational merger of the Thomson teams. Given your performance during the evaluation process, we'd like to offer you the role." Her eyes widened. "That's a significant promotion." "With commensurate expectations and scrutiny," I clarified. "You'd report directly to Nolan, with quarterly reviews by the full executive team for the first year, including measuring whether my father's daughter can handle increased responsibility," she asked, with self-awareness rather than resentment. "Including measuring whether a promising young executive is ready for senior leadership, regardless of last name," I corrected gently. "You've earned this opportunity, Madison. The question is whether you want it." She didn't hesitate. "I do. And I won't let you, or the company, down." As Madison left my office with a new purpose in her stride, I reflected on the improbable journey from that first confrontation at last year's gala. The entitled young woman who had dismissively called me just a secretary had transformed into a capable professional earning advancement on merit. Meanwhile, the company I had built from the shadows now stood proudly in the light, stronger for its transparency. The path from hidden power to acknowledged leadership hadn't been smooth for any of us. Yet the challenges, Madison's betrayal, Wesley's vendetta, Victor's crisis, and now Thomson Strategic's decline, had each strengthened rather than weakened our organization. Like the prehistoric creatures in the museum where we'd hosted our gala, those unable to adapt had faced extinction, while those who evolved emerged more resilient. I opened the folder containing the final acquisition agreement, ready to shepherd. Taylor and Reed through its next evolution. The company letterhead caught my eye, our names emblazoned in equal weight, a visual reminder of the partnership that had launched this journey. Richard had insisted on that design from the beginning, even when my role remained hidden from public view. "Never forget," he had told me, "it's not about whose name comes first. It's about building something that outlasts both our names." Looking toward the Chicago skyline from my office window, I knew he had been right. What we had built would indeed outlast us. Not just a successful consulting firm, but a legacy of recognizing potential in unexpected places and people. Including a once-overlooked secretary and a formerly entitled daughter, both of whom had discovered their true capabilities when finally seen for who they really were. 18 months after the acquisition of Thomson Strategic's key divisions, Taylor and Reed Consulting had expanded into a powerhouse with over 300 employees across 5 offices nationwide. The integration had proceeded more smoothly than anyone anticipated, largely due to Madison's skillful leadership of the transition team. Her promotion to Director of Integration Strategy had raised eyebrows initially, Some still suspected nepotism despite her proven track record, but her results had silenced even the most skeptical observers. On a crisp autumn morning, I stood at the podium in our downtown Chicago headquarters, addressing the assembled staff and press for a landmark announcement. The company's 10-year anniversary celebration doubled as the official launch of our Taylor & Reed Foundation, a philanthropic initiative focused on providing business education and mentorship to overlooked talent from disadvantaged backgrounds. Success isn't measured solely by growth or profitability, I explained, surveying the crowded atrium. It's measured by impact on clients, on employees, and on communities. This foundation represents our commitment to identifying potential where others might not look. As I outlined the foundation's 3 core programs, scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing business degrees, mentorship initiatives for women re-entering the workforce after extended absences, and entrepreneurship grants for innovative startups in underserved neighborhoods, I noticed Richard in the front row, beaming with pride. At 62, he had begun discussing potential retirement, though I suspected the foundation might give him a new mission to postpone that transition. Madison stood nearby, her professional polish now complemented by an authentic confidence that couldn't be inherited or purchased. At 33, she had grown into a respected leader within the organization, her early missteps long overshadowed by consistent excellence. Beside her sat Elena, Richard's wife, who had recently joined our board of directors, bringing her expertise in healthcare administration to guide our expanding medical consulting practice. After the formal presentation, as staff and journalists mingled during the reception, an unexpected visitor approached. James Thompson, fulfilling his final obligation as consultant before his contractual relationship with Taylor & Reed concluded. Though technically still involved with the transition, he had maintained a low profile, working primarily from the West Coast offices. "Impressive announcement," he said, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. "The foundation is a smart strategic move." "It's not a strategy," I corrected mildly. "It's purpose." He seemed skeptical but nodded politely. "Either way, it reinforces your brand position. The press coverage alone will be worth the investment." Some perspectives never fully evolved, I reflected. James would always view the world through the lens of transactional advantage rather than transformational impact. Yet, even with this limitation, he had proven a valuable asset during the integration, honoring every aspect of our agreement with surprising integrity. "How are your retirement plans progressing?" I asked, changing the subject. "Finalized. Next month, I'm relocating to Arizona. Golf, grandchildren, and absolutely no spreadsheets." He glanced across the room to where Madison was engaged in animated conversation with several journalists. "She's done remarkably well. Wouldn't have predicted it, given our limited but memorable interactions during that unfortunate period." "Madison has always had tremendous capability," I noted. "She just needed the right environment to channel it constructively." "Unlike my son," James said, a rare hint of genuine emotion cracking his polished veneer. "Wesley had every advantage, every opportunity, and squandered them all through entitlement and poor judgment." The mention of Wesley, now working for a small regional firm in Nevada after being quietly blacklisted by major consulting companies, brought back memories of the corporate espionage scandal that had catalyzed so many changes. I hadn't thought about him in months, his relevance to our organization long since faded. "People make their own choices," I said diplomatically. Madison chose to learn from her mistakes rather than double down on them. James nodded, his gaze still fixed on Madison. "I sometimes wonder if I had recognized Wesley's character flaws earlier and addressed them more directly." He trailed off, then shook his head. "Water under the bridge now. I should congratulate Richard on the foundation launch." As he moved away, Nolan Pierce, our COO, joined me. In the 2 years since his hiring, Nolan had proven himself an exceptional operational leader. freeing me to focus on strategic vision and client relationships. The board just unanimously approved the East Coast expansion plan, he informed me quietly. Construction on the DC office begins next month. Excellent. And the leadership structure? Also approved as proposed. Madison will relocate temporarily to oversee the launch, with Grace managing the analytics integration. The deployment represented a significant vote of confidence in Madison's abilities. Establishing our presence in the competitive DC market required political savvy and relationship-building skills beyond mere technical expertise. It would be her first major assignment completely independent of Chicago headquarters oversight. Have you informed her yet? I asked. I thought you might want to do the honors, Nolan replied. Given the journey you've both taken to reach this point. The observation was perceptive, highlighting Nolan's emotional intelligence alongside his operational acumen. He understood that my relationship with Madison transcended normal executive mentorship, shaped by our unique history of conflict, reconciliation, and mutual growth. I found Madison near the Foundation display, explaining the mentorship program to several interested staff members. She excused herself when she saw me approach. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, she reported, particularly from younger employees. We already have 30 volunteer mentors signed up. Not surprising, people respond to initiatives that align with authentic values. I gestured toward a quieter corner of the atrium. Do you have a moment? There's something we should discuss. Her expression shifted to careful attentiveness as we moved away from the crowd. Years of working closely together had taught her to read my tones and expressions with remarkable accuracy. The board has approved the DC expansion, I began, watching her reaction. Full implementation of the 3-year plan, beginning with the Pennsylvania Avenue location. That's fantastic news, she said, genuine enthusiasm lighting her features. The market analysis showed tremendous potential there, especially with the healthcare policy consulting practice. Indeed, which is why leadership selection for that office is crucial. I paused deliberately. The board has approved you to head the launch and establish operations. Initial 2-year assignment, with potential for permanent relocation if you prefer it once the office is stable. Madison stared at me, momentarily speechless, a rarity for someone typically so articulate. Me? Not Grace or Marcus? Both excellent executives, but neither has your specific combination of skills for this particular challenge. Grace will support the analytics infrastructure remotely, and Marcus will consult on marketing strategy, but the leadership role is yours if you want it. She took a moment to process the offer, her analytical mind visibly working through implications and responsibilities. It's a significant step, nearly autonomous leadership of a major office. With commensurate accountability, I acknowledged. The board expects the DC office to be profitable within 18 months. The learning curve will be steep. When would I start? Preliminary work immediately, relocation in January. You'd have about 3 months to transition your current responsibilities and assemble your core team. Madison squared her shoulders, decision made. I accept the challenge, and I appreciate the trust this represents, from you especially. You've earned it consistently over 4 years, I said simply. This isn't about trust anymore. It's about leveraging proven talent. As we rejoined the reception, Richard approached Elena, both sensing the significance of our private conversation. Good news? Richard asked, noting Madison's barely contained excitement. I'm heading to DC to establish the new office, she announced, unable to maintain professional reserve with her parents. Full operational authority with strategic support from Chicago. Richard's face registered surprise, followed quickly by pride. That's tremendous, though we'll miss having you here in Chicago. It's only 2 hours by plane, Dad, Madison reminded him, rolling her eyes affectionately. And there's this amazing technology called video conferencing. Elena hugged her daughter warmly. We're so proud of you, sweetheart. This is an extraordinary opportunity. Their family moment reminded me of how much had changed since Madison had first joined the company. The friction between her and Richard, the resentment toward me, the entitled expectations, all had transformed into healthy professional relationships, grounded in mutual respect and clearly defined boundaries. Later that afternoon, as the reception wound down, I retreated to my office to review final details for the next day's board meeting. A knock at the door revealed Richard, 2 glasses of scotch in hand. "I thought we might toast privately," he explained, setting the glasses on my desk. 10 years of partnership deserves acknowledgement beyond the public ceremonies. I accepted, the offered drink with a smile. Has it really been 10 years? Sometimes it feels like we just started. And sometimes it feels like several lifetimes, he countered, settling into a chair. Particularly these last few years. We sipped in companionable silence for a moment, the premium scotch warming as it went down. "I want to discuss something before tomorrow's board meeting," Richard said finally. "My succession plan." Though we had broached the topic of his eventual retirement previously, specific timelines had remained nebulous. "You're ready to make it official?" He nodded. "I'm thinking of 18 months. Gradual transition, shifting to a board role while relinquishing operational responsibilities." "The timing aligns with Madison's DC assignment," I observed. "Intentionally so. I want to be completely removed from day-to-day operations before she returns to Chicago. No appearance of parental influence clouding her accomplishments." He smiled ruefully, though I suspect she'd be the first to reject any such influence at this point. "She's become remarkably independent," I agreed. "The DC role will only accelerate that development." Richard swirled his scotch thoughtfully. "When she first joined the company, I had such conventional expectations that she'd follow in my footsteps, eventually take my place. I never considered she might forge her own path within the organization we built." Conventional expectations rarely survive contact with reality, I observed. "Speaking of which, have you given thought to your board successor? Nolan has certainly proven himself." "Nolan is exceptional," Richard acknowledged, "but I've been considering alternatives as, well," something in his tone piqued my curiosity. "Such as?" "What about Madison?" The suggestion caught me off guard. "For your board seat. She's young and relatively inexperienced at the highest levels. She'll have 2 years of quasi-autonomous leadership in DC by then, and she brings perspectives neither you nor I possess, generational insights, fresh approaches to technology integration, cultural fluency with emerging markets." I considered the proposal carefully. "The optics would be challenging. Father recommends daughter for board position has distinct nepotism overtones." "Which is why I wouldn't recommend her," Richard clarified. "I'd recuse myself entirely from the process. The nomination would need to come from independent board members based on merit alone." He leaned forward. "This isn't about preserving family influence, Olivia. It's about recognizing that Madison has evolved into exactly the kind of leader our company needs for its next chapter." The assessment was fair, divorced from paternal pride. Madison had indeed developed into an exceptional executive, her early missteps providing valuable lessons that accelerated her professional maturity. "Let's revisit this after she's had 6 months in DC, I suggested. "If she excels there, independent board members might naturally consider her without prompting." Richard seemed satisfied with this approach. "Agreed. Merit should determine advancement, not name or connections. Principle you've championed from the beginning." As Richard departed, I remained at my desk, reflecting on the decade-long journey that had transformed a small consulting startup into an industry leader. The path had been anything but linear, with unexpected detours and challenges reshaping our trajectory repeatedly. Yet each obstacle, Madison's betrayal, Wesley's vendetta, the Thompson acquisition, had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the organization. My phone chimed with a text from Janet, my longtime assistant who had evolved into our director of executive operations. Final foundation documentation signed by all trustees. Legal filing complete. We're officially launched. The message triggered a memory from our earliest days, sitting in that small cafe with Richard, negotiating my 51% ownership stake. "I'm tired of having my voice ignored," I had told him then. "This isn't about controlling you. It's about finally having the authority to implement my ideas without asking permission." How narrow that vision seemed now, focused solely on personal autonomy rather than collective impact. The foundation represented something far more significant, a mechanism to identify and nurture talent in overlooked individuals, just as my own potential had once been dismissed when I was just a secretary. The parallel with Madison's journey was striking. She had entered our organization with privilege and entitlement, yet had discovered her authentic professional identity only after losing those external advantages. By earning her position through merit rather than surname, she had developed confidence grounded in genuine capability rather than inherited status. My desk phone buzzed. "Ms. Reed? The Chronicle reporter is here for your interview about the foundation launch." "I'll be right. Out." I gathered my thoughts, preparing to discuss the initiative that represented our company's values more authentically than any corporate statement could. The reporter waited in our main conference room, notebook ready. "Ms. Reed, thank you for making time. I'd like to focus on the foundation's origin story. What inspired this particular focus on overlooked talent?" "Personal experience," I answered candidly. I spent years being underestimated and overlooked despite proven capabilities. Many of our executive team have similar stories. Richard Taylor faced rejection from traditional financial institutions. When starting this company, Grace Chen encountered barriers as both a woman and an immigrant in analytics fields, and Madison Taylor discovered her true potential only after setting aside inherited privilege to earn advancement through merit. Alone. Madison Taylor, that's the same Madison involved in the corporate espionage incident with Thomson Strategic several years ago, correct? The reporter asked, her interest clearly piqued by this connection. The same person, yes, though significantly, evolved professionally since then, I replied carefully. Her journey from that low point to her current leadership role exemplifies our philosophy that people deserve to be evaluated on current performance rather than past mistakes. And now she's heading your DC expansion. Quite a redemption arc. Prefer to call it growth rather than redemption, I corrected. Madison didn't need forgiveness so much as the opportunity to develop her considerable talents within a framework of clear expectations and appropriate accountability. The reporter nodded thoughtfully. You're known for maintaining majority ownership of Taylor & Reed, despite Richard Taylor being the original founder. Has that arrangement evolved as the company has grown? The ownership structure remains unchanged, I confirmed, though its significance has diminished as our leadership model has become more collaborative and transparent. What matters isn't who holds what percentage, but how effectively we leverage our collective strengths toward common goals. After completing the interview, I walked through our Chicago headquarters, observing the vibrant activity throughout the office. Employees from the original Taylor & Reed team collaborated seamlessly with those who had joined through the Thomson acquisition, distinctions between the groups now practically invisible. In the analytics department, Grace mentored junior staff members from diverse backgrounds, her commitment to developing talent extending beyond technical skills to professional presence and strategic thinking. Approaching the executive suite, I passed Madison's temporarily vacant office. She was in Washington for preliminary site evaluations, already embracing her new responsibilities with characteristic thoroughness. A photo on her desk caught my attention. The executive team at last year's holiday party, all of us laughing at something Richard had said. The image captured the genuine camaraderie that had developed among leadership, transcending the formal organizational chart. My journey from overlooked assistant at Pinnacle to acknowledged CEO of a thriving enterprise, had been neither straightforward nor solitary. It had required Richard's initial recognition of my potential, my own courage in demanding appropriate valuation of my contributions, and eventually, the collective efforts of a team that recognized merit regardless of title or background. Madison's path, from entitled daughterly expectation to earned professional respect, had been equally transformative, though beginning from the opposite direction. Both journeys illustrated the core truth at the heart of our newly launched foundation. Exceptional talent existed everywhere, but often required the right conditions to flourish. As I settled into my office to prepare for tomorrow's board meeting, I reflected on the moment that had catalyzed so much change. Madison dismissively calling me just a secretary at that fateful gala. Her contemptuous words, intended to diminish, had instead sparked a cascade of revelations and growth opportunities that strengthened everyone involved. Sometimes transformation began with confronting uncomfortable truths. Sometimes it requires losing artificial advantages to discover authentic strengths. And sometimes, most importantly, it meant recognizing that a person's true value had nothing to do with their title, background, or connections, and everything to do with their character, capabilities, and commitment to growth. The Taylor and Reed Foundation would now extend that philosophy beyond our organization, identifying potential where others saw only limitations. Meanwhile, the company itself would continue evolving under leadership that understood firsthand the importance of seeing people for who they truly were, rather than what superficial labels suggested. The path ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges and opportunities. Madison's DC leadership, Richard's transition to a board role, our continued expansion into new markets. Yet the fundamental principles that had guided us through the past decade would remain constant. Meritocracy over nepotism, substance over appearances, and the recognition that sometimes the most valuable contributors were those others mistakenly dismissed as just anything. 2 weeks after the foundation launch, I found myself boarding the corporate jet bound for Washington, D.C., accompanied by Madison and our real estate development team. The early morning departure had most passengers dozing, but Madison was wide awake, reviewing architectural plans for the new office space with meticulous attention to detail. "The conference center layout still concerns me," she noted as I settled into the seat across from her. "The sightlines from the main presentation area to the digital displays seem obstructed by these support columns." "A valid observation," I agreed, examining the blueprints. "Perhaps rotating the entire layout 45 degrees would resolve the issue while maintaining the necessary structural elements." Madison immediately sketched the modification on her tablet, her spatial reasoning impressive. "Like this? That actually improves the flow from the reception area as well." Our real estate director, Vanessa Morales, leaned over from the adjacent seat. "I'll have the architects run simulations with this orientation before our meeting this afternoon." "Good. Catch, Madison." The easy collaboration reflected how seamlessly Madison had integrated into the leadership team, her contributions valued for their substance rather than accepted due to her surname. As Vanessa returned to her seat, Madison set aside the plans with a thoughtful expression. "Something on your mind?" I inquired. "I was just thinking about the first time I visited the office, back when I was in college," she admitted. "Dad gave me a tour, pointing out where my future corner office would be once I took my rightful place in the company. I remember feeling so entitled to it all, without understanding what building and running a business actually entailed." "And now?" I prompted, curious about her perspective. "Now I realize how presumptuous that expectation was. The responsibility of leadership is immense. Financial outcomes affecting hundreds of employees and their families, client trust that takes years to establish but moments to lose, countless decisions daily that require both analytical precision and human understanding." She shook her head. "No one deserves that responsibility simply by birth. It must be earned through demonstrated capability." Her insight impressed me. demonstrating a maturity that transcended her chronological age. That's a perspective many never achieve, regardless of experience. Madison smiled wryly. I had excellent negative and positive examples to learn from. Wesley showed me the destructive path of entitlement without accountability. You and my father demonstrated how authentic leadership combines strategic vision with personal integrity. The comparison to Wesley Thompson caused me to reflect on how differently their paths had diverged. Have you had any contact with Wesley since the separation? Shadow crossed her features. He attempted to reach out about 8 months ago. A message suggesting we compare notes on our respective career trajectories. The subtext wasn't subtle. He wanted information about our Thompson integration strategy. How did you respond? I didn't, she said simply. Some chapters are better, left closed. Besides, our success speaks for itself. The quarterly reports tell a more compelling story than any personal exchange could. Her professional boundaries represented another aspect of her growth, the ability to distinguish between personal history and business priorities without confusing the two. The flight attendant interrupted with breakfast service, and our conversation shifted to the agenda for our Washington meetings. The D.C. office represented our most ambitious expansion yet, with specialized practice areas in government relations consulting and policy impact analysis alongside our traditional services. After landing, we proceeded directly to the Pennsylvania Avenue building that would house our new headquarters. The property manager led us through the gutted space, currently little more than concrete floors and exposed beams, but positioned with spectacular views of the Capitol Dome through floor-to-ceiling windows. The potential here is extraordinary, Madison observed, moving purposefully through the space. We should organize the layout to maximize natural light throughout work areas, not just executive offices. Studies consistently show productivity increases of up to 15% in well-lit environments. Vanessa made notes on her tablet. We could implement a partial glass wall system for interior offices, allowing light penetration while maintaining necessary privacy. Exactly, Madison agreed. And let's consider a modular furniture system that facilitates both collaborative work and focused individual tasks. The consulting teams often shift between these modalities multiple times daily. Watching her command, the planning process, I noted how thoroughly she had internalized our company's employee-centric culture. Where once she might have focused on status symbols like corner office placement and executive amenities, she now prioritized functionality for all staff levels. The afternoon involved meetings with local officials regarding permits and zoning, followed by interviews with potential contractors. Madison navigated each interaction with polished professionalism, asking incisive questions that revealed her thorough preparation and strategic thinking. Over dinner at a respected Georgetown restaurant, as our team relaxed after the intense day, Madison raised an unexpected topic. I've been developing ideas for the Foundation's first DC initiative, she began, retrieving a document from her portfolio. I'd like to propose a partnership with Howard University's Business School, providing mentorship and internships specifically for first-generation college students interested in consulting careers. The proposal was comprehensive, identifying resource requirements, potential obstacles, measurable outcomes, and implementation timelines. The thoroughness impressed me, particularly since this was entirely beyond her assigned responsibilities for the office launch. This is exceptionally well conceived, I noted, reviewing the details. What prompted your interest in this specific demographic? Madison considered her response carefully. During my time volunteering with the financial literacy nonprofit, I worked closely with several first-generation college students. Their perspectives were uniquely valuable. They approached problems with unconventional thinking, unconstrained by traditional business paradigms. Yet they often lacked the professional networks and insider knowledge that students from business-oriented families take for granted. The opportunity cost to our industry is substantial, I agreed. Talent, Overlooked due to circumstantial barriers rather than capability limitations. Precisely. And Howard University has an outstanding business program, but remains underrepresented in major consulting firm recruitment compared to Georgetown or George Washington University. The initiative exemplified our foundation's core mission while establishing meaningful community connections in our new location. Present this to the foundation board next week. I suspect they'll approve implementation funding immediately. Madison appeared genuinely pleased by the endorsement. Thank you. I want the DC office to be recognized not just for client excellence but also for community impact from day one. Later that evening, after returning to my hotel suite, I received an unexpected call from Richard. "How's the Washington expedition progressing?" he asked after preliminary greetings. "Productively. The space has tremendous potential, and Madison has impressed everyone involved with her preparedness and vision." "Not surprising," Richard noted with evident pride. "She's been researching DC commercial real estate trends for months in anticipation of this assignment. She's also developed a foundation initiative targeting first-generation business students at Howard University. The proposal is remarkably thorough, addressing both implementation logistics and strategic alignment with our mission." A moment of silence preceded Richard's response. "You know, when she first joined the company, I worried constantly about whether she could overcome her initial missteps, whether the Thompson incident had permanently damaged her potential here. Understandable concerns at the time, I acknowledged. But watching her evolution has been extraordinary," he continued. "The entitlement giving way to earned confidence. The defensiveness is replaced by receptiveness to feedback. The superficial analysis deepens into substantive insight. She's become an exceptional executive," I agreed. "And she's done so by developing her authentic strengths rather than mimicking either of our leadership styles." The observation sparked deeper reflection about our company's future leadership. Taylor and Reed had begun with a clear dichotomy. Richard, as the charismatic relationship builder, me as the analytical strategist behind the scenes. Yet our next generation of leaders was developing more integrated skill sets, combining elements of both approaches with their own unique capabilities. The following morning, Madison and I met with the dean of Howard University's business school to discuss her proposed partnership. The conversation quickly moved from conceptual overview to practical implementation, with the dean offering valuable insights about student needs and institutional priorities. "What impresses me most about this proposal," the dean noted, "is its mutually beneficial structure. Too many corporate initiatives approach universities with charitable intent but extractive impact, using our resources and students without meaningful reciprocity. We're seeking genuine collaboration," Madison clarified. "Your students gain professional exposure and mentorship. Our firm gains diverse perspectives and potential talent recruitment. The foundation provides funding and coordination, but success requires equal commitment from all parties." The meeting concluded with preliminary agreements to move forward, pending formal approval from our foundation board. As we departed the campus, Madison's normally composed demeanor showed rare excitement. "If we can establish this model successfully here in Washington, we could replicate it in each market where we maintain offices," she observed, "creating pathways for talented individuals who might otherwise never access our industry." "An ambitious vision," I noted, impressed by her long-term thinking. "Ambitious, but achievable." The ROI analysis in my proposal demonstrates how even modest success rates would generate significant talent acquisition benefits over a 5-year horizon. Her balanced consideration of both social impact and business outcomes reflected a sophisticated understanding of how successful corporate philanthropy operated, not as charity disconnected from strategic priorities, but as mission-aligned investment yielding multiple forms of return. Upon returning to Chicago the following day, I found an unexpected visitor waiting in my office, Elena Taylor, Richard's wife, and our newest board member. "Elena, this is a pleasant surprise. I thought you were presenting at the medical conference in Boston until Friday." My session was rescheduled, she explained, which fortuitously allowed me to review the Foundation's healthcare initiative proposals before next week's board meeting. She gestured to the documents spread across my coffee table. The mentorship program for nursing administrators transitioning to healthcare executive roles is particularly compelling. Grace developed that concept based on her mother's experience, I noted, joining her on the sofa. The expertise gap between clinical excellence and administrative leadership creates unnecessary barriers for otherwise qualified professionals. Elena nodded appreciatively. It's precisely the kind of systemic issue our foundation should address. She hesitated before continuing. I've also reviewed Madison's Howard University partnership proposal. Richard forwarded it to me last night. And? Your thoughts? It's exceptional work. Strategically sound, operationally detailed, financially responsible. Her expression softened. Beyond the proposal itself, I'm struck by how thoroughly Madison has embraced the Foundation's core mission. For someone raised with such privilege to develop genuine insight into opportunity barriers requires remarkable personal growth. As both Madison's mother and a board member, Elena occupied a unique position, able to appreciate her daughter's professional development from multiple perspectives. Her ability to evaluate Madison's work objectively, without either maternal bias or compensatory strictness, demonstrated why Richard had championed her board appointment despite potential nepotism concerns. Madison has earned her opportunities through consistent performance, I affirmed. The DC leadership role and any future advancement will reflect merit rather than family connection. As it should be, Elena agreed firmly. Richard and I have always wanted her to build her own legacy, not merely inherit ours. Her early mistakes at the company, painful as they were at the time, may have been necessary catalysts for her current success. The observation aligned with my own reflections about transformative moments, how Madison's entitled dismissal of me as just a secretary had ultimately led to growth for everyone involved. Sometimes necessary lessons come packaged in uncomfortable experiences. The week concluded with our executive team's quarterly strategy review, where Nolan presented updated 5-year projections incorporating the Washington expansion. The financial metrics were impressive, anticipating 27% revenue growth with proportionately smaller overhead increases due to operational efficiencies. Beyond the quantitative outcomes, Nolan noted, transitioning to his final slides, I'd like to highlight key qualitative indicators of organizational health. Charts appeared showing employee retention rates, client satisfaction scores, and diversity metrics across leadership levels. We're not just growing larger, we're growing stronger across every meaningful dimension. Particularly noteworthy, Marcus added, is our dramatic improvement in external perception. Industry rankings now consistently place us among the top 5 consulting firms for both client results and workplace culture, a rare combination in our sector. Grace nodded in agreement. The data supports a clear correlation between our transparency initiatives and these improved outcomes. When we eliminated artificial hierarchies and hidden power structures, both client trust and employee engagement increased significantly. The observation brought our journey full circle. What had begun as a necessary deception, my hidden majority, ownership, had evolved into a corporate culture defined by its opposition to such arrangements. The company had transformed from one built around carefully maintained appearances to one grounded in authentic transparency. As the meeting concluded, I remained behind, reflecting on the decade of growth that had brought us to this moment. The small 2-person partnership Richard and I had established had blossomed into a thriving enterprise with hundreds of employees and thousands of clients. Yet our greatest achievement wasn't measured in revenue or headcount, but in the organizational culture we had cultivated, one that identified and developed talent wherever it appeared, regardless of title, background, or circumstance. Madison's journey from entitled heir to earned leader epitomized this cultural evolution. By losing the artificial advantage of family connection and rebuilding her position through demonstrated merit, She had discovered capabilities far exceeding her initial expectations for herself. Similarly, my transition from hidden power to acknowledged leadership had created space for authentic recognition rather than behind-the-scenes influence. The Taylor and Reed Foundation would now extend these principles beyond our organizational boundaries, identifying potential in overlooked individuals and providing the resources and mentorship necessary to develop that potential fully. The Howard University partnership represented just the beginning of this broader impact. As I gathered my materials to leave, Richard appeared in the doorway, his expression suggesting he had news to share. The board just unanimously approved Madison's Howard University initiative, he announced. Full funding for a 3-year pilot with potential for permanent endowment if outcome metrics are achieved. That's wonderful news. She'll be thrilled when she returns from Washington tomorrow. There's more, Richard continued, entering my office fully. The Executive Search Committee has officially closed the COO succession planning process. They've identified Nolan as my replacement when I transition to the board next year, with unanimous approval from all independent directors. The decision was expected, but nonetheless significant, formalizing our leadership succession plan well in advance of Richard's departure date to ensure smooth transition. Nolan will excel in the role, I agreed. His operational expertise complements your relationship-building legacy while bringing fresh perspectives to our strategic direction. Which brings me to the final board decision, Richard said, his expression more serious. They've created a new position effective immediately. Executive Chair of the Taylor and Reed Foundation, with board-level authority but independent from corporate operations. An important step in establishing the foundation's autonomy, I noted. Have they identified a candidate? They've asked me to assume the role upon my corporate retirement, Richard revealed, leveraging my industry relationships while creating appropriate separation from Madison's career path within the company. The arrangement was elegant, providing Richard meaningful post-retirement engagement while establishing clear boundaries between family connections and corporate advancement. Madison would continue her professional development under Nolan's leadership rather than her father's oversight, maintaining the meritocratic principles we had worked so diligently to establish. A fitting capstone to your career, I observed, building philanthropy upon the business foundation we created together. Richard smiled reflectively. When we started this company, I thought I was giving you an opportunity. In reality, you were giving me one. The chance to build something that transcends traditional business metrics to create lasting impact. We gave each other opportunities, I corrected gently. And now we're extending that philosophy to others through the foundation. As Richard departed, I turned toward the window, gazing at the Chicago skyline now illuminated by early evening lights. The Taylor and Reed logo gleamed from our building's crown, visible for miles across the city. A fitting symbol for the increased visibility we now embraced as an organization. The journey from just a secretary to acknowledged leader had been neither straight nor simple. It had required confronting uncomfortable truths, navigating complex relationships, and transforming obstacles into growth opportunities. Yet the destination had proven worth every challenging step along the way, not just for me personally, but for everyone whose lives our company and foundation now touched. The foundation's mission statement, displayed prominently in our reception area, captured this philosophy in words Madison had actually suggested. Recognizing potential others overlook, developing talent others underestimate, creating opportunities others thought impossible. In Dao, those principles lay the essence of our shared journey, and the legacy we would leave for others to continue long after our individual contributions had ended. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.